none of us who are descendants of Africans, especially those who were enslaved, should do a goddamn thing for free.
This is Shana,
And Chris.
and we are Bad Queers. If you came out of the closet and got put in a box of stereotypes you don't belong to, then welcome to the Bad Queers Club.
This week in Queer Urban Dictionary, I have activism fatigue, also known as social justice burnout. It's a state of mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion that can occur when someone is involved in long-term activism. It can be caused by a number of factors, including, not limited to, constant exposure to negativity and trauma related to a cause, feeling overwhelmed by the scale of an issue, lack of personal boundaries, inadequate support systems within the activist community, experiencing backlash or personal attacks, feeling like your efforts are not making a significant impact, and neglecting self-care practices.
All right, my Queer Urban Dictionary word of the week is a phrase of the week, and it is be gay, do crime. So be gay, do crime is an anti-capitalistic and anti-authoritarian statement implying that crime and incivility may be necessary to earn equal rights given the criminalization of homosexuality around the world, and that the Stonewall Uprising was a riot. Used in a sentence, after this election, we may have to activate Be Gay, Do Crime again. We meet at dawn. All right, once again, we have company that's coming back. Welcome them home. Right before this election season, we wanted to make sure that we had this episode out for you all the day before the election because it's going to be a time. We're in for a ride and we need to be guided in by a professional. So we welcome back Dr. David J. Johns, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition, or the NBJC, a civil rights organization dedicated to the empowerment of Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer plus, and same gender loving people, including people living with HIV and AIDS. Dr. Johns was appointed the first executive director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans by President Barack Obama and served from 2013 to 2017. Dr. Johns was a senior education and policy advisor to the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions under the leadership of U.S. Senator Tom Harkin and has served under the leadership of the late U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy. Dr. Johns was a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Fellow in the office of Congressman Charles Rangel. Dr. Johns received his PhD in sociology and education policy at Columbia University. Dr. Johns obtained a master's degree in sociology and education policy at Teachers College, Columbia University, graduating summa cum laude. He graduated with honors from Columbia College, Columbia University in 2004 with a triple major in English, creative writing, and African American studies. Dr. Johns received the Active Advocate Award at BET's Black and Iconic Celebration in 2024, was named to the Out 100 list in 2021, the Root 100 in both 2013 and 2014, Ebony's Power 100 in 2015, and received an Early Career Award from Columbia University Teachers College in 2016.
All right, we have company, and probably the greatest company to have at this really important time in our country, in our world. David, welcome back to Bad Queers.
Thank you for that introduction and for having me back.
Absolutely. So last your first appearance was on Bad Queers was July 2023. Tell us what you've been doing. I know I've been watching you pack people up on Mark Lamont Hill's YouTube, but what have you been up to?
I feel like much like my participation on a Breakfast Club interview with Malik Yoba, where among many things, I clarified that gender is assigned at birth, and you would have thought that I told people that I raped their mother. I feel like I live, what did Mark say? Exploding on a Republican grifter down. And I accept that because it was warranted, and I don't regret any part of it other than being muted. Yeah, I think that is one extreme of how my life and work in attempting to defend democracy has manifested. In this moment, I should name that I'm having a difficult time recalling life before, I don't know, the last, let's say, when did I get engaged? July?
Mhm.
It's not June. June of this year, we produced Equity Week, which included an equity ball at Howard University, where a number of different houses and members of our community competed for ballroom categories that were themed around voting and election defense and civic participation. We had a march from McPherson Square to Black Lives Matter Plaza, to Freedom Plaza, where folks like Tamika Mallory and Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter, who was the first person to use the term hashtag Black Lives Matter, a brilliant sister named Dreesen Heath, who has been at the forefront of attempting to get reparations for survivors of Tulsa and other racial massacres and manifestations of white terror. They sort of spoke, and those activities culminated a week of engagement where people came from as far as California, some of them for the first time, to participate in civic duties. So I'm naming that because that's as far back as my brain goes, but so much of what I can recall in this moment has been around democracy defense. And as a leader of a nonprofit organization, that shows up in helping people to appreciate facts and what people and parties and policy initiatives have and might mean for them and people they know and love. And in my personal capacity, a lot of my energy has been expended, quite frankly, attempting to wrap my head around how folks have become politicized around genocide, and in particular, genocide in Gaza, often without regard for genocide here in the United States or in the Sudan or in other places where it has been happening. And then related to that, attempting to understand is not quite the right word because I can wrap a part of my brain around it, but it's attempting to make sense of the logic around what feels like single issue voters, when my experience is that as a queer person who is queer because of my race and my sexual identity and gender expression, I don't feel we have the luxury of doing that with any issue. And I find that to be, in this moment, given what the stakes are and who the candidates are, to be, quite frankly, exhausting. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. I actually wanted to dig into that. Do you think that there's a lot of there has to be some genuine conversations going on in that, but how much of that do you think is people grifting and, for lack of a better, what word are they, like the outrage marketing of it all? And I know with that, it's going to be Twitter forever. You can monetize on rage and all things. How much of the conversation is actually genuine dialogue that our community needs to have, and just, showing folks that, hey, there's multiple issues and we can hold all these things at once, versus the people who are actually doing it for attention, for likes, to build their platform, to grift?
What percentage is reflective of the grift compared to necessary and or helpful
Dialogue?
conversation? Maybe 95% grifting slash performing, and 5% necessary. And I'm struggling with the 5% for two reasons. One is, the older I grow, the more frequently I'm reminded that there are few things that are new. And there are few conversations that Black folk have not had. We might not have them in public. We might not be expected to have them outside of our homes, however one might define that. There might be people who we're not supposed to talk to about it, whether that be a priest, representative of the state. But I'm struggling in this moment as I run through in my head the policy issues that matter most frequently for Black folk. I'm gonna come back to that in a second, to identify something that is new and or that is offered up by the radical right wing, MAGA controlled Republican Party, the media industrial complex, or any of the actors who came to mind when you posed this question. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking in this moment about, this is why conversation is helpful, community is helpful. I'm now also remembering that this year we launched, NBJC launched the Teach the Babies podcast in anticipation of the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, the first case. There were 2 cases. Most recently, so the podcast drops everywhere where podcasts are available, including y'all's, on Tuesdays. And because there's been so much going on around the election and I needed a container, we added office hours. And by the time this drops, 2 episodes ago, the guest who dropped by the class was Clay Kane, who wrote the book about Black grifters. And he tells the story about the history, rather, of the Republican Party that Frederick Douglass and other freedom-seeking and Black-loving leaders founded, and the ways in which people like, I'm trying to be polite, but the nigga in Florida who lies about picking cotton when his family owned the land, the nigga married to Jenny who occupies a seat on the Supreme Court where he has mastered and created new blueprints for how to grift, for Candace Owens and Omarosa and so many other people in between. What Clay Kane says is that whenever one is willing to betray their own community, there's a check in it for you. And what we have seen and experienced since Donald John Trump rode his ass down that gold escalator is that there is not only a market, but an industry for people who are willing to lie. And in fact, the more evidence there is that what you're saying is contradictory to how you existed in the world before you start the grift, the better the platform that some people have been afforded, e.g. Candace Owens. But this is a really long way of saying, to your question, I find that most often the conversations that we are lulled into as a community are distractions. They're what Toni Morrison and so many others continue to warn us about. And they are designed to divide and conquer us in ways that enroll us as queer folks with a capital Q in being the master's tool and otherwise oppressing each other because we're lulled by this lie of protection because of proximity to power or the trappings of capitalism or whatever it might be for someone that is antithetical to all of us getting closer to freedom together. Now, I mentioned I was going to come back to something, and it was me holding space for referencing the policy priorities that matter most to Black people. NBJC partnered with 5 of our peer organizations, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, Imani Rupert Gordon, the LGBTQ Task Force, Kiera Johnson, Family Equality, at the time James Black was leading it, HRC, Kelly Robinson, and GLSEN, Melanie Willingham-Jagger. We partnered together to collect data hypothesizing 3 things. One, that Black people are more committed to all of us getting free and struggling together than our progressive read white colleagues and the media often suggest. 2, we wanted to get a better sense of what Black people identify as the policy issues that matter most to them ahead of this presidential election cycle, and see if there were messages and messengers that would invite Black people to do more for Black LGBTQIA plus folks, Liga-Biga-Tiggas, and the communities that love us and that we're a part of. And what we found is that there's absolutely no daylight between the policy priorities that Black cis het folks identify and Black queer, trans, and gender expansive folks. They are, you want to guess what they are before I run through them? The top 3 policy priorities that matter to Black people?
I would say health, healthcare, access to healthcare.
That's number 1. Keep going.
That's number 1. Definitely the economy,
That's number 2. The cost of everything, inflation, healthcare, college, rent is too damn high. Yep. What's the 3rd one?
would it be education?
Mine was going to be housing.
I guess education would go in there.
Housing goes into that second one, the cost
Okay.
of everything. Education in part goes there. The cost of higher education ranked lower on the list as a specific call out, but the third one is the racial justice, equity, sort of anti-policing, the reform in the prison industrial complex. And I just love how that came together because it is reflective of what the data shows. So the policy priorities are the same. We want the same shit. And that's often not the same order or list of priorities for our white counterparts, especially when considering sexual orientation and gender identity. Won't continue to go down that rabbit hole. The second thing we found is that Black folks are highly movable. The vast majority of Black folks identify themselves as what we labeled as passive supporters or active accomplices. There's a small percentage of members of our community who are members of the ops. They're not movable. And when you push on that category, what most people are saying is that the LGBTQIA plus stuff is somebody else's responsibility. They're like, I got too much stuff going on that I need to deal with.
Yeah.
Let somebody else do it. That's above me now. Or they name religiosity. And then the last thing is that messages matter. So we found at the first phase of our research, focus groups through polling, the second phase, as well as message testing, that when we connect data to messages about individual and communal action, then that people are impacted, that they move or they shift in where they start, and where after exposure, they say that they land on a couple of measures. And the data point that matters most to our community is around youth and suicidality. And people can find more about that at nbjc.org/blackfacts.
Black Facts. We actually talked about that a couple pods ago when the Black Facts study came out. So y'all definitely go check that out.
I was like, it's full of information, and it's great to be able to have that alignment that expresses where we do fall in the same, because I feel like that narrative has started to get a bit louder than usual when it comes to Black, cis, straight identified folks compared to Black queer folks, and that there continues to try and be a divide and a separation, but it's not helping us at the end of the day, as you're proving with this information, that we are fighting for the same things and we are hoping for the same results. But it's like, why do we continue to push against our own greater good?
Yeah, to push on this point at the risk of being persnickety is because not all of us are fighting for the same thing. Not all of us know that it is possible to be free. And that requires you to, one, do the tough work of sitting with and learning to find comfort in yourself in ways that are freed from the trappings of white supremacy. So this is cis het folks wrestling with the privilege that comes with being cis and het, in spite of the fact that you were otherwise a minority because you were Black or a racial or ethnic minority or have a disability or not Native or are otherwise queer with the capital Q. That's one part of it. And then the second part of it is understanding the teachings of Fannie Lou Hamer, which is that none of us are free unless and until all of us are free. And so in this moment, aside from the Gaza of it all, I still spend entirely too much time dealing with the consequences of the radical right otherizing trans folks. And when I think about too many other conversations I've had with Black folks successfully, right? That Caitlyn Jenner exists in the world as a reflection of all the worst parts of what people imagine when they think about trans identities and experiences, coupled with the nasty work of folks like Dave Chappelle and J.K. Rowling and so many others. The white girl who got hit in the face so hard in the boxing match that she used transphobia and transmisia to attack someone who simply was better than her. That our folks have bought into the transphobia, transmisogynoir of it all without appreciating that the same tactics are used against Black folks more generally vexes the shit out of me. And there are still so many who have not had to or be held accountable for confronting our ignorance, our manufactured ignorance around gender and sexuality and identity development more generally, I understand why we are where we are.
Yeah. Up against a lot with it. So David,
Always by design.
it's been 101 days as of today's recording, July 21st, when President Biden dropped out of the race and endorsed Kamala. We all know this election season has been like no other. Where were you when the announcement came down that Joe Biden was not seeking re-election? And what were your initial thoughts and feelings when you heard the news?
I'm smiling now because I was at Kitchen and Cocktails, meeting with some friends to talk policy and strategy, including Demetria Lucas, who has an amazing podcast, Ratchet and Respectable.
Great podcast.
We were talking shop. I'm almost certain that we were there long enough to have experienced is this going to happen? Then there was an announcement that it happened. We each called people to confirm that it happened, and then debated what it all meant. So yeah, that's where I was. What was the second part of the question?
Yeah, what were your initial thoughts and feelings? Like when the news was confirmed, were you on the anxious side of things? Because there was so much obviously going on social media with it. And I was happy to hear the news. But I know there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of people who were anxious. A lot of people thought, oh wow, a black woman, obviously given history and facts, like America will never elect a black woman. But yeah, where did you fall
Yeah, let's
on
never say
the feelings?
never. Words matter, so let's not say that.
Never say never. Yeah.
As Brandy now is playing in my head. What was so I can't I remember the experience of fellowship. I don't, because there was so much conversation, I don't want to attribute someone else's perspective or feelings. I don't want to claim them as my own. So let me answer it this way. I remember that same night, because it was a Sunday, that my dear friend Joteka Edie and Holly Holiday and Christina Q, who all run Win with Black Women, hosted a call, an organizing call that they had been hosting for the better part of at least 4 years. Every Sunday, rain, sleet, hail, whatever, these Black women are on this phone talking about how to own their power. And this particular Sunday's call, because the ancestors were all also working, birthed what became known to the public as this Win With strategy and platform. That following Monday, there was a Win With Black Men call organized by my brothers and comrades, Quentin, who he and his wife Stephanie run the Collective PAC, Michael Blake, Roland Martin, who hosted the live stream, Khalil Thomas. So we had Win With Black Men. Later that week, I remember being in New Orleans and participated in the Black queer Save Jada Loving Man call with Emil Wilbekin and Alfonso David and Rashad. So all of this to say, and this was like, then there was Cat Ladies for Kamala, like all of the different organizing moments. There were also fundraising calls. I remember watching the sparks fly around, again, that regular routine organizing moment, and having two feelings related to it. One, I was so very happy that my friends who have been doing this work, who show up for folks campaigning at every level of government across the country, that they were being acknowledged and in some moments compensated for their labor. All too often, this goes very much back to the core of the question about the VP, Kamala Harris, and my feelings about her and the position she was thrust into and is very much prepared for. But all too often, Black women are expected to do custodial work and labor without being compensated for it or supported in ways that acknowledge the work required of them. I'll come back to that. So I was happy that was happening. But I was also pissed off that as people were telling the story, sometimes people were giving those Black women their credit. And then when they were doing something that comes up when I think about Beverly Johnson and the brilliant work she does with Black Girls Rock, which is reminding folks that, like, while you experience us as magic, or you experience Black women and girls, and when I say that, I mean trans and cis, as magic and magical, that shit is fucking work. That it requires an expenditure of labor and love and a sacrifice of time and resources, and that wasn't attached to the story pissed me off. And I continue to vacillate or oscillate between those two positions as I pray for advocate around and witness the VP do the work required of someone who was earning the votes to be the next president of the United States, and struggle with my frustrations around how Black queer folk, because women are queer in a pejorative society that expects men to occupy spaces of privilege, especially mediocre white men in this context, how queer people, generally Black women more specifically, are often, again, expected to do shit that nobody else is expected or capable of doing without the resources or respect that should be afforded with that labor, if they so chose to do it in the first place, which often is not a consideration anyway.
Just want to take a moment for that, because that is information that I think folks continue to forget as they have those expectations. And Michelle Obama just did an amazing speech that talks about it. And we also got to see her frustration. She is sick of us, and sick of people who are making those poor decisions, but also recognizing what Black women do in these scenarios and how much we do step up and how much we are taking on an extreme amount of emotional labor while moving through waters that nobody has paved, but expecting us to do it perfectly. And so I appreciate that focus.
And not just because in this moment I got chills that came over me. Where's the picture? It's in the living room. I have a picture from the children's ball that we produced during the inauguration. What I think about often is two things. One, Michelle Yvonne Robinson Obama served our country. Not only did she serve our country, her children, Sasha and Malia, her mother, Grandma Robinson, they all served our country, offering the best parts of their brilliant selves while being unrelenting targets of white terrorists.
Yeah.
And not just like white people, but white racial actors and those in close proximity. And so for them to have made those sacrifices, for Grandma Robinson to have gone on to glory, and for this race to be as tight as it has been is a fucking travesty.
Yeah.
And that she and so many others continue to be as gracious as they are should be lauded more publicly.
I want to switch gears. This is coming out again the Monday of election day and week. And there's going to be a lot of feelings this week. I don't know how it's going to go. But what do you say to people? I don't know how next season. Listen, it'll be too late, or maybe not, but take off on Wednesday if y'all can. But what do you say to people who,
whatever the hell you need to, call out Black
the rest of the week?
Call out Black.
Call out Black. Call out Black. What do you say to folks that are exhausted and feel like voting is the end of their civic duty?
I say first, I overstand. This shit is exhausting. Shit is a technical term. That's the PhD side of my brain. And by that, I mean existing as a Black person, existing as a queer person, whether that be because you are Black or you are a member of a sexual minority community or you are a woman in a society that still privileges men, right? Like, what I know is that all of us who know the sting of stigma and the damage of discrimination know that this shit is exhausting, this thing called life, period. Next paragraph. And we are required, for as long as we are able to do this thing called life, to engage in the struggle to get closer to freedom collectively. The second part of what I heard in your question was around voting specifically. And what I would say is three things. One, let's invite in bell hooks, lowercase b, lowercase h, because she wanted you to focus on the work as I look for the book. But what bell hooks says in Teaching Critical Thinking is that too often we forget that democracy has to be defended by each generation. We still, in spite of having experienced, some of us, January 6th, having lived through, some of us, the novel coronavirus, having lived through the schizophrenic, terroristic leadership of Donald John Trump, some of us, we still forget that our democracy is, one, incredibly young and also incredibly fucking fragile. The insurrection has proved that to us, and still are. But too often we forget that fact. And up underneath that fact, we forget that every year is an election year. There's always an election for something. And what frustrates me based on the data is that we often over-index. We still, too many of us who have the ability to vote don't. That's one. There are lots of reasons why and obstacles that people create, and still, comma, not enough of us exercise the right that people are still fighting and dying for. And voting is only one of the tools that exists to allow us to exercise our civic duty. And so I want us to step back from an understandably important focus on voting, given where we are in this moment in our geopolitical maturation, but engaging in community discussions about issues and people, leaders elected and appointed who matter and or in positions of power is important. Volunteering to support organizations and leaders and causes that matter is important. Holding elected and appointed leaders accountable, staying informed and informing others, right? Like, there's so many ways that we can and should be engaged in the sustained practice of being an advocate or organizing. The distinction between those two often is that advocacy generally is focused on a particular cause or raising awareness about a particular issue in a singular moment in time. Organizing is around building an infrastructure and creating community to advocate for that thing in a way that's sustained and builds power over time. Very much two things that are related. But I want to encourage people to, again, honoring the first part of this, which is understandable exhaustion, to seek rest and respite, and what my friend CC Battle would talk about as frolicking, intentionally, on purpose, before you need it, and finding ways to engage in meaningful and sustained advocacy and organizing over time.
Rest before you need it is that thing.
Yeah, because too often, and this comes up for me as an employer, not with my team now, but I've often experienced that folks will take a mental health break when they have already had a breakdown, or, call out when their body has forced them to. And it's important for us to do what wealthy white people do when they go on retreats into their country clubs and off to their yacht experience on regular times, but to find sustained ways to rest and recharge and engage in what folks call respite.
Absolutely. Is there a way to engage that doesn't feel like a constant hustle? It's almost like if we had the layers where it was like level 1, level 2, level 3 activism that can still create meaningful impact. What would suggestions be from you?
Is there a way to engage that doesn't feel like a constant hustle? I think that unless you assume the job of being a professional advocate, like a role that I have assumed, engagement shouldn't feel like a thankless task. And so my advice would be to seek advocacy and organizing. This is a part of what I just said previously, but seek advocacy and organizing opportunities that you can incorporate into your routine, that are part of how you live and demonstrate your values in ways that are both meaningful and manageable, right? And so finding and incorporating podcasts and listening to folks like y'all regularly to stay abreast of information, to combat disinformation and misinformation is a part of this. Finding ways to be a part of organizations like GLSENT or NBJC, or your local community-based organization that is doing the damn thing to make sure that the most marginalized are centered and all of us are getting closer to freedom, is a way that you can build community to help hold you in doing this work, so that it doesn't feel like a, quote, hustle. Finding ways to engage in discussions where you are talking about how the Electoral College is the most perfect manifestation of DE&I and how it benefits white people, including Donald John Trump, who benefited from it in a sustained way that allows people to connect to organizing to try and shift that in the near future, right? Like these are all hope are examples of ways that we should be thinking about this work as a part of who we are and how we show up and pay the debt of being human and are benefiting from the sacrifices that our ancestors have made, rather than it feeling like a chore or, to use a word that you offered, a hustle. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. And in depth.
David, I want to ask you about valuing our leaders and activists. There is a expectation, an unrealistic expectation, that y'all should be available 24/7, that y'all got to be perfect. Y'all can't make a lot of money. There's a lot of crazy things attached to this. Like, how can we challenge this expectation and allow activists to set boundaries without guilt?
How do we create boundaries without guilt? I think that guilt is an invention of white supremacy and should exist in white supremacy hell. So we should not feel guilty for, we should not feel guilt when we do things that are required to protect our peace. So we should find comfort in setting and enforcing boundaries that are about protecting our peace, or as is tattooed on my right arm, guarding our joy. That's one part of this. The second is many of us live in capitalist societies where we are required to engage in an exchange of labor for monetary and or other forms of compensation. None of us who are descendants of Africans, especially those who were enslaved, should do a goddamn thing for free.
Yeah.
We should be demanding to be paid in equity and with considerations for the reparations that we're owed. I say this acknowledging the point I made previously about Dreesen and Tulsa and massacres or manifestations of white terrorism that they are continuing to try and erase. With regard to those of us who choose to be public advocates, we are only able to survive and sustain ourselves in this work when we do those things, establish boundaries, are compensated for our labor, create community where we can be reminded that we are not crazy, and be affirmed in the strategies required to get closer to freedom. And when there are other active accomplices who understand the importance of what we do and block and tackle in ways that make it possible for us to do the work that many of us are both called and purposed to do.
Absolutely. Especially because activism fatigue is incredibly real. And to your point of being able to rest and recharge before it gets to the point of having to do that, I know that it's important to have those mindless activities to be able to just go and commune with your community, to travel, to take care of yourselves in general. So how can, honestly, amplifying these moments also allow us to stay politically and socially engaged?
I heard you ask two questions. Well, the first one was anchored around mindless moments. The second part, you're asking how engaging in mindless, quote unquote, I'm coming back to this, mindless activities can help us remain politically engaged.
Yes.
Part of my brain is wanting to ask you to define mindless activities, in part because the things that I imagine are on that list, scrolling on social, watching TV, listening to a podcast, are not in fact mindless. They often invite us to use a different part of our brain. Even I think I recall you referencing communing with folks. Being in community requires engagement, labor, often love labor if it's with people you choose to be in community with. But there are a few things that we do that don't require some form of labor or work. I'm trying in part to use labor more than work because of how because of what the word work means in a capitalist society where we are often thought of as only valuable based on economic viability. So that's why I keep using labor. So I'm spending a little bit of time here to push against the idea that the need to, and I would argue to the latter part of the question, sharpening and or benefit that comes from engaging in these, let's use another term that comes up in education, but like soft skills,
Mm-hmm.
right? In a world where like people using like science and technology is like hard skills and like critical thinking itself, it's also bullshit, but let's just use the purposes of sanity. But like watching ratchet reality TV often sharpens and enables me to do other forms of what one might argue as higher level thinking. So for people who are like, what the fuck is he talking about? That sounds like bullshit. The one of the few times that I came close to being fired while being appointed by still my president, Barack Hussein Obama, it was in part because I made a calculated, considered decision to accept an invitation to show up on The Real Housewives of Atlanta. So if you'll go back with me in reality TV history, you'll
Please take us
remember
back.
Phaedra Parks
Yeah.
was in the middle of saying, go away from me with that
Go away,
Apollo.
Apollo.
So our Aiden was here. She was pregnant with the prince, both of whom are beautiful, brilliant young men who she's done a wonderful job with helping to raise and develop. Not helping, being primary in raising and develop, words matter, let me use them appropriately. But the short of it is that Phaedra wanted to leverage her platform as Black women, queer people, Black people who love other Black people often do, to shine a light on some of these issues, in particular the challenges that Black men and boys face. And so she reached out through a mutual friend to me, who had been appointed by President Barack Hussein Obama to lead the White House initiative on educational excellence for African Americans. This is right before he had announced, and we had announced and rolled out My Brother's Keeper. And in a world where I spent almost 300 days in the first year of my political appointment traveling to spread the good word of what this administration and people who love this country and were serving it in that way were doing, I could show up in this space and reach millions of people domestically and throughout the world in ways that were mission aligned. It was a no-brainer for me. And the reality, to use the word intentionally, is that there were colleagues of mine who couldn't understand the importance of reality TV or what that platform continues to mean for so many people, Black and otherwise. Or the calculus around, I can reach a fraction of those people traveling the world and exhausting myself versus participating in this thing that exists and reaches millions of people. And not only would I make the decision again because it made sense based on, again, my values and responsibilities in that role, but I often found that as someone who showed up as a representative of the White House, my ability to talk to people about what the fuck Phaedra and Nene was, what was going on, and like, and how people were shifting wigs, and I would often ask people like, who were the Black dads on TV at the time? It was T.I. because it was Tiny and T.I., right? Like, my ability to engage in forms of conversation with people who might otherwise be locked out of the jargon that political wonder kids use allowed me to connect dots and build relationships with people that otherwise might not have been there. So this is a really long way of challenging the words and notion that some of the things that we do because we find joy in them and or that are necessary, like a part of it is I spend so much time thinking about things that have consequence, children dying, people not having access to life-saving or affirming care, what it means for folks not to have, like, the end of fucking democracy. Like, those things are waiting. So sometimes I just want to watch a TV show that reminds me that, like, I have a really nice life and my friends love me and there's a whole lot of shit that I don't have to worry about at night. That stuff is necessary, not only because it allows me to engage with those feelings, but because all of that allows me to do all of the other things that one might believe is what those things are, that one might believe are disconnected.
Oh my God, David, it just kind of came to mind. Are you like an early political influencer? Because during that time, I mean, as opposed to now, what they do with the campaigns and the different stuff that they bite off that's viral. I know I just saw the Harris campaign had done the balloon dating thing. You kind of were an early pioneer with that, being on the Real Housewives. Like that was
Yeah, I'll tell you before that.
huge.
Before that, I'll tell you this. I remember, shout out to Mildred Otero, who at the time, Mildred, when I left the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, Tom Harkin was chair. He inherited the committee after Ted Kennedy died. God rest his soul. Mildred became my boss before I left the Senate. But when I first started in the Senate, as a junior policy advisor, Mildred was a senior policy advisor working for Senator Clinton. When I was a fellow, before I even took the job, I was connected to her by a mentor friend to this day, Annie Minguez. Annie inherited me because as a CBCF fellow, so let me back up. For folks who haven't heard this story, I took a pay cut from teaching elementary school in New York to be a fellow with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. I worked in the office of Congressman Rangel, and one of the brilliant anchors there, Annie Minguez, saw how hungry I was, rolled out her Rolodex and sent me over to the Senate under watch care with Mildred, who was a social worker. We shared New York in common. And I'll never forget Mildred counseling me because she loved me against being on Twitter. Because at the time,
Yeah.
it was just emerging such that principals were getting Twitter accounts. And the thinking was at the time, staffers are not people. You are part of a body. You work for this person. So if you go tweet, send the tweet to whoever's running the account, let them run it. I had a very different attitude about my role in that, I very much understood I was there to be disruptive. And a part of my job was to make sure people who otherwise would have access to information that most of the people in that institution took for granted had access to it. And so I took to tweeting early on and was willing to die and or be fired on that hill. And I need to call Mildred and ask how she feels about this. I think that she would concede that I was right for doubling down on moving in the way in which I did, and it was early on.
I love those remember when texts. You go back and be like, I was just thinking about this. Remember when?
Remember when I was right? No, I can't do that with her in particular because she was right. She said when I said to her, I'm leaving, I'm gonna go work on this campaign, I'm gonna move to Nevada. We're gonna get the Black president reelected and prove Mitch McConnell and everybody else wrong. And I'm gonna come back. She was like, you're not gonna come back. She said, once you leave, you're not gonna come back. She said, here's what I will do for you. And this is why you gotta have friends who fucking love you and can see things for you that you can't see for yourself and that are willing to block and tackle for you and can help you be strategic as you organize and make calculated decisions. Mildred said, I will keep your office for you. I will remove everything that will allow you to get in your way so you can go. And she was right. I did not come back. I came back to my shit, but right, like, so I will not do the right thing with her. And it's important to have people who love on you with perpetuity. Yeah, shout out to Annie and Mildred.
Speaking of reality TV, David, Love is Blind season 7. Have you been watching?
Begrudgingly, yes. I thank my fiance, Audre Derek White, for the fact that I am watching another reality TV program next to Married at First Sight. Seems to be intent on platforming Black men who are the most ain't shit. I wish it's a good therapist and a bunch of motherfucking friends who would rough you up in the best way possible. Sense of the word.
I knew DC was going to be something else, but it has been something else. And as we record this, the reunion is going to air. What are your feelings? What do you think is going to happen on the reunion? What are your predictions for this reunion? And second question is, who was the true villain this season? Because there was a lot of villains, but who really reigns above all?
This is I wish I knew her name because I want to give her credit. There's a creator on TikTok who really brilliantly like does the diagrams and like walks through things and like zoom in.
Amber.
That is Amber, the black sister. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So she did one recently.
funny.
Was blind and did the triangle.
Yes.
Yes.
So-
That pyramid of ain't shit.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Absolutely.
what pyramid of Asian. Except for I was like, we need to invert this and put most of the motherfuckers at the Asian category top. Okay, so I don't know where to start. So let's start with who won this season. Nick D.
Nick did.
Nick won the
Nick.
Nick D.
Tell me more.
So in a world where so I'm not gonna do their name, but in a world where you got I don't want anybody to love me for my money, but I want to tell everybody how much money I make and how much I can buy.
Mr. Rolex.
Oh, Leo.
It's the art dealer, right? You got him on one end. I'm gonna leave all of the black men out of it. We'll get to the ducktail of it all. I need therapy because I miss my sisters of it all. And who the fuck is you? These children are gonna see this one day. You asshole bastard, talking sperm donor. Let's put them let's put them aside for a second.
Along with the two locks as well.
That's why I said ducktail of it all.
Oh, the ducktail is
the
two.
Right. Also, did you see that Tyler's homeboy showed up with a similar issue when they were getting fitted for their tuxedos? I was like, what is going on?
Remember that for real?
It's a beacon, honestly. They just call each other with it.
So funny.
And let's pray for them. So when I just think about all of the men on this season, again, there's a part of me that sometimes conflates the cast from Love is Blind and Married at First Sight. Like, Nick was just seemingly authentic at times where it felt like he was being goaded or gaslit. He maintained his cool. That time when they were, was it the honeymoon or when they were meeting socially later? But oh girl, Hannah, was it Hannah, the girlfriend's name?
It was Hannah.
The running back, when Hannah was like, you can't talk to my best friend, even though that's my best friend, because I don't know what my best friend said to you. And he was like, what you worried about, right? Like, I love you, I'm with you. If that's your best friend, that's your girl, right? Like,
that was the word.
Yeah.
It was
won't even her best friend.
In a world where I often find myself watching because I want to have the ability to offer commentary for myself when I'm in similar moments, like, nigga, that looks stupid as hell. Nick was most consistent and even and cool for me. He was just a cool cat. In terms of like, and considerate.
Hannah.
In terms of villains, we can start with Hannah because the distortion and misrepresenting and flip-flopping she did that was beyond problematic.
Yeah. And her friends, throw her friends in there too, because that was such a weird meetup of just attacking him and just, I was like, who are these people?
And
I would have left.
And it's supposed to be your man, so what is we doing, friend?
Yeah. Right.
So weird.
Okay, so let's get into the challenges. Alex, and what's our boy's name who missed his sisters?
Tim.
Tim.
Yeah, who keeps posting as if yeah. Okay, so I really struggled with this dynamic, right? Like, so I knew early on, honeymoon, I felt like she called him a bitch. I called that. I was like, oh, she challenged his manhood. And I felt like watching him, I was like, okay, he is clearly in touch with his emotions. He is right. He is doing what Black men should be able to do, which is name how they feel when they feel a kind of way. And I started to then recall the ways in which he talked about the longing in his life, right? Like how frequently he mentioned, and again, some of this, I want to be careful acknowledging how things are edited and people become offered up to us as characters, but it felt to me like he missed his sisters, not necessarily that he was there to find his wife. And that energy, like when they were on that couch and often when they were together physically, it was like, do y'all actually like, what's the there? And when he was like, I'm out, I was like, oh, that's a bitch move. And I can't say that I'm surprised that we are here. Ramses and what's our sister's name? Marissa, my God. I cried watching Marissa cry.
I started to well up. I was like, ooh,
her being blindsided in that way, like I felt like I owed her mom an apology because she was right. and had all of the energy that she should have had when she met him.
Mhm.
And how dare him show up on this show, playing the games that he played and the way in which he played in that Black woman's face.
Yeah.
I want to punch him and pull his hair. And then the last one, this nigga Tyler. So here's my question. The question is, at what point did he actually tell Ashley what he told her? If y'all remember the scene when they're sitting outside after their wedding on the like rock wall, there's like, I forget what the question is. It's about kids, and there's a moment where they both turn to the camera, and it feels like they let us in on the fact that like they are in on the joke together.
Yeah.
Again, I started to go back and ask myself, like, what did we watch? What did we experience? How much of this is manufactured? And a part of this is because there's also so much of the show happening online and what people are telling us about the deals that they make to go through the experience together. And that made me sad. The part that made me angry was, again, appreciating that the children that this nigga is talking about and playing with are going to at some point be forced to experience the telling of how they came into the world in this. And how fucking dare you? How dare you? If any of what the women who are mothers of these children, if a fraction of what they're saying is true, how fucking dare you? And not only do I blame that nigga Tyler, I blame the fucking producers who had to have known about this shit in the first place.
They have to. At this point, it feels like they're doing these things on purpose.
Well, playing in our face again, playing in our faces on purpose. And when I go back to understanding how images are constructed, it's like, y'all know what y'all do.
Yeah. One of the interesting things is that they didn't, as far as I know, y'all could correct me, after the initial conversation, you know, when he's crying on the couch and everything, they never had any more conversations on camera about this, like just even talking through his situation.
The next time he came back, she just was like, yeah. And then she came back and was like, I'm going to be okay with this and ride with you. And that was like the next thing. It was like, drop that, next day date. And then at the date, she dropped that.
One of the other lovers.
Her daddy, did y'all see her daddy recently come talking about he only found out?
Wait, what?
So one, her daddy with his faking ass tears when they were supposed to be standing at the altar, he go, I just, sir, you playing. He recently dropped a TikTok video, I saw it at least on TikTok, essentially saying that he just found out about the fact that Tyler has kids. Essentially, he's late to finding out all this information that he didn't know it at the time in which he met him. And I also say that too, to go back to, what was our other brother's name? The one who needs a good therapist?
Tim.
The scene between Tim and not Ashley, the other ones, her dad struggled through all of the ways in which MS is gripping his body to articulate his love and appreciation for that man loving on his daughter. For him to what is the word that I want to use in this? For him to shift away from that, and what I imagine is not a significant amount of time, is something that I'm still struggling to process and comprehend.
I feel like she said as much too. Ashley was like, you just said this like a day ago to my dad, or 2 days ago to my dad. Yeah, which is nuts. But he was all, after that fight in Cabo that they didn't air, I feel like he was out of it. Like, that's when I knew they weren't going to work. But as you said, David, like, they never looked like they liked each other outside the pod. Like, not for real. And I'm not going to, the honeymoon period of when they're in Cabo or wherever they went to vacation doesn't really count to me. I think when they got to the apartments, I was like, I don't know. I don't think this gonna work.
Well, yeah, there's that, and then but then I go back to something she also kept saying, which was like, I committed to seeing this through. Why couldn't you just do that? That came up also when Marissa was negotiating with Ramses, right? Like, why can't we just see this through? And I've also seen her articulate that as well, right? Like, when you're in a relationship, you try and see it to the end, no matter what that means for you. There is a in a world where let's go back to the capitalism of it all. In a world where what I understand is that they get paid for the phases of the show, and into the phase of walking to the altar is the final, the phase before the reunion phase. I struggle to understand why Ramses in particular didn't see it through. Yeah, I mean, I can, the other one, I can go back and forth about it, but the Ramses thing will always vex me.
Yeah, I am glad he did that before they did get to the altar, because when they get all ready and dolled up and then to make that decision, it's like, ugh. What was the guy last season, the black guy, the track star that said nah? He was it Clay? Yeah, I didn't want another Clay situation just to do this. So your top 3, who is the worst this, and again, before watching the reunion, who is the worst person this season to you?
It's a combination between
Tyler Ramses.
Yeah, Tyler and Ramses.
Yeah, tied at one. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And maybe Hannah too, depending on. Yeah.
Hannah needs therapy as well.
Hannah's my one, because Chris
I was cutting her some slack.
Debated this because I was like, no, Nick, and she was saying Hannah, and I was like, no, the way that Hannah moves and grooves is way like a walking red flag.
And from like conversation 1,
literally that.
Yeah, you know why I was getting her slack, and when we had that episode, that was after, I guess, the first drop or whatever set of episodes.
Yeah, it was the first chunk.
To me, it was because Nick was so, while sweet and considerate, he was so green. I was like, Nick moved from like downstairs to upstairs. Like, he had no life experiences. He couldn't boil water. So I was like, I could see her frustrations. Now, delivery was always bad, but then we haven't had a recording since it, and I was like, ooh,
right, this was before
it turned out bad.
Before she said it with a straight face, I took you from a boy to a man.
Yes. Yeah, I was like, okay, I was very wrong. So she was tripping. She needs to heal. But then, also when we met her parents, I was like, oh God, there's a dynamic there too, and all that, because she left and went out on her own. There's a lot of
questions because she's talking about.
Correct me if I'm wrong. This is a season where I feel like the most parents were like, "No, I'm good." Y'all, I don't support this. I'm not put up on camera. I was like, okay,
because Ram's parents were like, "Nah," and all that. And that was also when he was on that. They were on that boat. He was saying weird things, like when she was asking him to like engage in the planning of the wedding. He was like, his ex-wife or his family followed his ex-wife. Some weirdo shit where I was like, I didn't feel good about it. And then when they dropped the. Did y'all see when there was for a second there did look like he had a thong on, and that was making its round on the internet.
And this is why I hate niggas, because I saw the TikTok videos first where it was like all of the women in bed with their men who were watching the show. Then they're like, the nigga going on the thong, and I'm like, clearly it's a mic pack.
My wife asked that.
And if you kept watching when he goes to bed,
you see it, yeah.
You clearly see Calvin Klein. So
yeah,
so funny.
But if it was, I don't.
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
Straps. I know straight men like, and so what?
I know. I stopped and I was like, if there was anybody who was going to on the show, it was going to be him, and it would have been like,
actually,
good on you.
Actually, as a Black Sandra the Loving Man, you'll be surprised. The niggas I know who wear lace and who love a little frill are not the ones who you would expect.
Do y'all think previously married people should go on Love Is Blind? Like, as a Rams, do y'all think they should limit it to people who have never been married?
Is that by sheer mathematical permutations? Is that possible?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
I like the numbers behind it.
Yeah.
I think a more interesting threshold would be to have people who have been in some form of sustained therapy for a defined period of time.
Yeah. I was like, I don't trust Netflix to do that at all. But, here we go. All right. Well, we'll see what happens on the reunion tonight. And the days that, whatever happens after this too, because I feel like obviously they could speak more freely once everything is out. So we'll get more stories. Yeah. We'll see what happens.
We'll see. Our group chat will go off. It'll be a great time.
It's gonna be something.
All right, well, let's go ahead and shift to our bad queer opinions because what type of bad queers will we be if we didn't have unpopular queer opinions? We are going to shift this a little bit today since it is election time and we want to talk about the things that are coming and prepare for this. So we want to take this opportunity to move away from our bad queer opinions and we're going to instead give you some tips, tricks, and takeaways from David. So, Chris, what questions do we got?
Just one. What are three impactful actions that folks can take after election day to stay engaged and with minimal effort? Because we're speaking to here the people who are the bare minimum and they do think that voting is their only civic duty. What are some like three impactful actions that people could take after election day to stay engaged?
Yeah. So first, I'll do my bad queer opinion, which is that um, believing that you cannot do politics and that politics won't do you um, is something that we got to be beyond, beloved. Um, Too often, elected and appointed leaders are making decisions that impact our lives in incredibly intimate ways, often without our consent. And so we should appreciate that voting is the bare minimum for how we can engage in a conversation with people who are in trusted positions of power. So that's one, is to check the politics of our existence. The second is to celebrate. I'll do it this way. The second is to build community. The third is to focus on accountability. If you are not a part of an organization or have a group chat that is dedicated to sharing information, talking about political leaders and policies and activations that can help advance the issues that matter most to you, or get the people you know and love closer to freedom, or increase access to opportunities and improve life outcomes for all of us, then find an organization. Find a home where you can find, sharpen, leverage your political, social skills to use the ways in which your values and purpose manifest in ways that only exist because of you existing. Find some place to use those talents for good, and do so in a community of folks that can hold you and affirm you and encourage you to take rest when you need to, and affirm your brilliant ideas when you are contributing to the big policy wins that often don't come, but that require us doing this protracted, sustained work that we've been talking about over the time that we've been together virtually on tonight. And then the third part is to leverage all of those things, understanding the many ways in which politics touches our lives, often without our consent, to engage in community focused on radically inclusive, equity centered, freedom pursuits that are all about defending and expanding democracy, and to hold whoever ends up in seats that belong to the people, right? We elect people, those seats don't belong to them, they belong to us who allow them to occupy them. Let's hold these leaders accountable. In addition to knowing who represents us, they should know what matters to us. They should know that we'll show the fuck up and remind them what matters to us. They should know that we are connected to organizations and communities that will invest in their campaign when they're doing the work on behalf of us, and will get in the way when they're not. The same shit that AIPAC does, right? While we don't have two champions for equity in Congresswoman Cori Bush and Congressman Jamal Bowman going back to Congress next session. Finding ways to hold folks accountable so we get out of the often overly reductionist, elected leaders only talk to us when they want something when they're campaigning dynamic, is in part on us. So we can find ways to leverage our power to hold them accountable the day after they're sworn into office. And then I offered three. I want to name that. But my last thing is this, something I mentioned before, and I'm looking at my arm again. Guard your joy is on one side. And then the other says, rumble, young man. A quote from the great Muhammad Ali, a name he chose because Ali means most high. We will likely not know the outcome of this election for days, if not weeks to come. Mm-hmm. If nothing else, we should all be prepared for the consequences of white rage, which will manifest no matter what. We should all appreciate that fascism knows no end, that the strategies that are being used to target and terrorize trans folks and queer folk and Black folk and those of us who live within all of those intersections will not go away. They will become more refined, which requires us to, what people say often, take the long view, rest, so that we can continue to show up in the arena doing this work to get us all closer to freedom faster. That's my 3.5.
Love it.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation right before the election. And I can't believe we're already wrapping up, but we are at the end of the show. So it's time to give shout outs to our faves, because you know we would never leave you without giving shout outs to our faves. My shout out this week goes to Queer Sober Social. They host virtual and in-person events in Chicago for any sober or sober curious folks who identify along the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. The sole purpose is to socialize in a relatively unstructured environment. So you can follow them, join their events on IG at Queer Sober Social.
All right, my shout out is to Pansy Collective, an all trans artist collective founded in 2016 as a response to rising fascism in the US following the election of Trump, to support those most affected by oppressive policies and hateful ideologies. I was introduced to Pansy Collective from an article that was on them a couple weeks ago about the mutual aid they provided after Hurricane Helene, before FEMA had any presence in Western North Carolina. They distributed 6 truckloads, 2 trailers, and a box truck filled with supplies to folks that were affected. So please donate to further their great work and what they're doing. And you can follow them on IG at pansy.collective. David, who are your shout outs?
I will shout out the Black, queer, trans, and gender expansive elders who hold our community down and remind us that we always have the tools needed to not only survive, but to thrive. I encourage people to check out this year's cohort of Audre, Lorde awardees. We do our Wisdom Awards in May. Those are female identified members of our community. And then the James Baldwin Legacy Awardees were just presented recently around James Baldwin's centennial birthday. So there are a bunch of people in the last 3 years cohorts. I encourage you to get to know each of them and find ways to support those who are still living and doing the work.
All right, David, and where can they find you?
You have information about everything that I've been talking about at nbjc.org. We are at NBJC on the move across socials. The podcast is the Teach the Babies podcast, and I'm at Dr. David Johns across platforms, and I'm incredibly thankful for you all inviting me back.
Y'all follow and support. And David, we appreciate everything that you do for us in the community, and to stop by and chat with us. You know you can always come back, and we'll have you back. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. I look forward to doing it again.
Yay.
God, you are good people.
And thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. And of course, we will see you next week.
Take care.
It's me again. Can we talk about things? I'm sorry that I'm gone.